Hello and welcome to Torah Thoughts. The portion of the Torah that we read this week, the Parsha of the week, is actually a double portion. It is Parshat Behar and Parshat Bechukotai. Behar meaning on the mountain. So it starts off with Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Behar Sinai, and God spoke to Moshe from or at Mount Sinai. And the Parsha of Bechukotai, which follows immediately, Bechukotai means in my statute, in Bechukotai telechu. God is promising the nation of Israel a whole list of blessings if they walk in the path of his statutes and keep his mitzvot and so on. So I want to explore the connection between those, the meaning of the parshas and the connection between the two parshas. So when Parshat Behar, when the Torah opens up with Parshat Behar, it says, Vaydaber Hashem, like I said, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe, Behar Sinai. And then it says, and then it goes into the whole laws regarding Shemitah. So what is Shemitah? Shemitah is, it's a very unusual law that basically it says there's a 7-year cycle regarding agriculture in the land of Israel. This applies only to the land of Israel, and only from the Torah's strict perspective, only when a majority of the nation of Israel lives in Israel, which has only happened recently, since 2,000 years ago when we were exiled. But in any event, so what is the mitzvah? There is a 7-year cycle, and in the first 6 years of that cycle, it's farming as usual. You can farm, you can plant, you can sow, you can reap your crops, and so on, and sell them, obviously. On the 7th year, everything stops. There's no planting, there's no harvesting, there's no taking care of the crops, there's no pruning any trees, nothing. All agriculture stops. And guess what? The owner of the farm doesn't even have claim to ownership of what grows. Whatever grows wild, whatever grows on its own, you can take from it as much as you need for yourself to bring into your home. But then again, so can anybody else. Anybody can walk onto your farm and just take whatever's growing over there. And you can't gather food to sell it. And that's just the way the farm is going to be. So you can imagine what happens in a situation like that. That is a very, very difficult thing for the people of Israel to carry out. And I'm going to go into that in a minute. But first I want to go into what Rashi questions about how these verses are written. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe Behar Sinai. God spoke to Moshe at Mount Sinai and gave him the laws of Shemitah. So Rashi asks a very good question. Why does it say, and God spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai? We already know from tradition, we already know from what was handed down generation to generation way back from the beginning, that every mitzvah, all the commandments were given at Har Sinai. Why is the Torah telling us this? We already know that. And the answer is that the laws of Shemitah are unique in the way that they were written, in that when it was originally given, most of the other laws just says what the mitzvah is, what the law is, and it doesn't go into detail. Later on, in many cases, it's in the book of Deuteronomy, in Devarim, you see almost all of the laws are repeated, and that's where you get some details. And then we have more detail, what we get from the oral tradition, and the oral tradition, again, we learned, again, handed down from Moshe, handed down from God to Moshe at Har Sinai, how to interpret the Torah so that we can understand its details. And that's what the Gemara and the Talmud are all about. So in this case, the laws of Shemitah are a bit unique because right here in this parsha, the laws of Shemitah are given in detail, unlike many of the other mitzvot. And that's why Rashi explains, that's why it says Behar Sinai, to explain to us that just like the details here were given at Har Sinai, and we know all of the mitzvahs were given at Har Sinai, but in this case we actually see that the details were given at Mount Sinai. It says so right in the Torah. From there we see that all the other mitzvahs are just like this one. They were also, all of the details were given at Har Sinai. So I want to dig a little bit deeper into that explanation, because I think it has some very profound applications to our life today. So again, going back to what is Shemitah. Again, 6 years, you do all of your work. The 7th year, you do nothing. No work, no produce, no agriculture. Now remember, Israel in the time of the Beit HaMikdash was an agricultural economy, right? Could you imagine what it means? That for 1 year out of every 7 years, the economy shuts down. Till recently, maybe we didn't have such a close understanding, such a meaningful understanding of what that means. Right now, I think all of us understand what it means when everybody stops working. We've been at this now, this shutdown that we're going through, we've been at it for what, 2 months, 3 months, depending on where you live, some places even a month, and look at how much it's harming us. Imagine for a year. For a year, no buying, no selling, the backbone of the economy comes to a full stop. And people would question, how are we going to survive? Right? Now that requires a lot of trust. God says to do it, and you do it. But God gives you an answer. God says, if you keep this mitzvah, I'll reward you. You're going to make so much money, don't worry about it. Now that still requires a lot of trust. That's miraculous. God says, stop your economy for a year and don't worry, I'll take care of you. Now that requires a lot of trust in God. You know what he says in this particular case? God says, don't worry about it. If you can't muster such blind trust, I'll tell you what, right? I will reward you in advance. God knows man's thoughts. If you, and I'll read what it says, V'chitomru, and if you'll say, Man nochal b'shana hashvi'it, what will we eat in the 7th year? Hen lo nizra v'lo ne'esof et tviatenu. We can't sow, we can't gather our crops. What will we eat? And it's not only what are you going to eat from what grows. How will we eat if we don't make a living? And God answers, V'tziviti et bichati lachem b'shana hashishit. I will give you my blessing on the 6th year. Meaning the reward comes. God knows your thoughts. God knows what's in your heart. You intend to keep Shemitah on the 6th year. You're going to get rewarded. So what will the reward be? Va'asa et hatfu'ah lishlosh hashanim. You will make triple the agriculture. You will have triple the crops on the 6th year. Why triple? Why not double? Well, the Torah explains. Because on the 6th year, you need enough for the 6th year, obviously. For the 7th year, because there's no economy on the 7th year. But remember, you're not planting on the 7th year. So the 8th year, meaning the first year of the next cycle, you'll have nothing growing because nothing was planted in the 7th year. You're not going to have a harvest. So God gives you enough in the 6th year for you to sustain yourself for year number 6, year number 7, and year number 8. And that's the blessing you get for intending to keep Shemitah. So now it's not so much a matter of trust. You already got the blessing, right? The question is, though, we learned about the concept of free will. It's always a challenge. When God gives you a commandment, it's a challenge. Do you accept the word of God? And if God stood before you and told you to accept it, free will would kind of weaken or maybe even disappear. How do you say no to God? So that's why God gives us a Yetzer Hara, an inclination to do bad. And the Yetzer Hara generally is that thought process that we have that says, but this is better for you. Do what's good for you. Instead of trusting that what God says is good for you. In this case, you don't have that because God already gave you the reward. So where's the challenge in keeping the mitzvah of Shemitah if you already got rewarded for it in advance? Well, the answer is it requires not trust. It requires something that's the next step after trust, faith. Right? So what do I mean by that? Well, there's a joke that you may have heard of. Man's driving around New York City looking for a parking. He's late for a meeting, and he's going around the block and up and down. The parking lots are all full. He can't find the parking on the street. He's going crazy looking for a parking. He pulls over to the side, looks up to heaven, and says, God, if you find me a parking space, I promise you, I'll give half the profit from this meeting to charity. And boom, within seconds, someone pulls out of a parking spot right next to him. He looks up to heaven and says, God, never mind, thanks, I found one myself already. Faith. When you pray to God for something and God gives it to you, the next step is, do you believe that God's the one who gave it to you? Right? You know the expression, there's no atheist in a foxhole, right? So when you're going through a battle, it's one thing when you're desperate for something and you don't have anyone else to turn to, you put your trust in God because you got no one else. And you pray to God, oh God, please help me. But when it comes, whether it's a reward, whether it's an answer to a prayer, whether it's any sort of a miracle, the test happens, the test becomes, do you acknowledge that this good fortune that just came your way was God? And that's faith. So could you imagine, again, it's an agricultural economy, okay? And you're farming on the 6th year. And you had, what a year! You had the best year you've had in, 7 years, right? And now you say to yourself, the end of the year is coming, you're counting all your profits. This is great. Business is great. And now you got to shut down for a year. So you might say to yourself, the farm is great. The crops are doing great. Everything is going my way. Why shut down now? You got to be crazy. Can you imagine the stock market is rolling and it keeps going up and going up and going up, and all indications are that the stocks are going to continue to go up. Are you going to stop trading? Well, that requires faith, because you need to understand that this 6th year, you had a great year, That wasn't just because the crops happened to be doing great. God gave you that so that you shouldn't work on the seventh year. And even though everything is going great, you stop on the seventh year. That's faith. And that brings us to the next parsha, Parsha Bechukotai. And here's the connection. Okay? Parsha Bechukotai opens up. If im Bechukotai telchu, if you walk in my statutes, it says, and you keep my mitzvot, and then there's a whole bunch of blessings that happen. Well, when these blessings happen, right, you no longer need to trust that God's going to give you those blessings. Okay, because that's a whole other parsha, that's a whole other conversation. Now that God says, you followed my mitzvah, I'm giving you the blessings, what happens now? Do you understand that it's God that gave you those blessings? And that's where the challenge comes from. So the question is, well, I'm going to tell you a little story, okay? My wife was very, very sick a few years back, right? She had cancer that it was very questionable. It was touch and go about whether she would survive. Statistically, she wasn't supposed to survive. And of course, like every person in such a situation, I begged God to make her healthy. And I prayed every day, and thank God she recovered. Now again, I say thank God, that's part of this whole conversation. She made a miraculous recovery. She's been cancer-free now for a few years. And the doctors, actually one of the doctors said, I'm not supposed to say this, but the only explanation I have is it's a miracle. So again, I thank God for it. But why not thank the doctors? Why not thank the pioneers in cancer research? And of course, I do thank them, and I thank God for the doctors. I thank God for making the doctors succeed, and I thank God for making the researchers come up with a medicine that was specific to her cancer and was very successful, and so on. But thank all the other factors as opposed to God. Well, did I pray to them? Did I pray to the doctor? Did I stand outside the doctor's office and say, oh, doctor, please, please, I know you can do it? No. Because when times are desperate, it hits you deep inside. There's only one source from where help can come from, and that's God. And you need to remember that when the miracle actually does come. You know, it's easy to turn to God when there's no one else to turn to. But now that the miracle came, you need faith to recognize who made it happen. Now, I have a friend. He celebrates Yom HaAtzmaut every year by taking a haircut. And he says so every year. He says it's an act of faith to take a haircut on Yom HaAtzmaut. Why? Well, that between Pesach and Lag BaOmer, some people between Pesach and Shavuot, there is a period of mourning where we mourn the death of the students of Rabbi Akiva, and we don't do anything celebratory. Among the things we don't do, we don't listen to music, we don't have weddings, we don't cut, we don't get haircuts. Yom HaAtzmaut is during that period, but since it's such a special holiday, he goes out and gets a haircut because such a celebration overrides the mourning process. The question is, do you believe that the miracle of the rebirth of the Jewish nation, of the rebirth of the return of Jewish sovereignty in the Jewish land, was an act of God? If you have that faith, you believe that, then you can go take a haircut on Yom HaAtzmaut. If you believe, listen, it was politics, the British got sick of us, and the Irgun fought the British, and the UN didn't know what to do, and Khrushchev had a bone to pick with Churchill, all true. But that was God putting it all in place, and He gave us the land of Israel, and that's why Yom HaAtzmaut, an act of faith. You believe God gave us that miracle. And now I want to come to something a little bit closer to home, the coronavirus. Israel is opening up again. I read that schools are supposed to be open this Sunday. And Israel went through this. It may not be completely over, but they've gone through this coronavirus so far, please God. They've gone through it with about 16,500 cases, 266 deaths. Israel, by the way, is about the size and square mileage, about the size of New Jersey, and about the same population size, a little under 10 million, both the state of New Jersey and the state of Israel. Israel had 16,000 coronavirus cases. New Jersey, 142,000, closer to 143,000. Israel had 266 deaths. New Jersey has about that every day, a total of roughly 10,000 deaths. Now, why? Is it the Israeli doctors? Maybe the Israelis have excellent doctors. So is New Jersey. Is it the climate? Because it's hotter over there? Maybe. Did they have a better plan? I'm sure there's other factors. Japan did great also. There are plenty of places who did great. So whenever one country or one state or society does great in times when other people in New York are suffering a catastrophe, why? And you have to have faith and say it's God. Yeah, the disaster part of it also. Everything that happens in life comes from God. And when good things happen, you got to thank Him. Now, another very important holiday that's coming up next week is Yom Yerushalayim. Yom Yerushalayim is probably one of the most significant historical events in modern history. It is the unfolding of the step-by-step process, which leaves no doubt that there's going to be a time when Mashiach comes. It leaves no doubt that Hashem has not forsaken the Jewish people. And we're coming back. We've come back to Jerusalem. And there's more to happen yet. But Yom Yerushalayim is such an important piece of that puzzle. After 2,000 years when no one said it was possible, the Jews returned to Jerusalem, meaning control. Before 1948, Jews were able to go to Jerusalem under British rule. And before that, under Turkish rule, and before that, sometimes yes and sometimes no. But for the first time in 2,000 years, Jerusalem returned to Jewish sovereignty. Which, by the way, the Vatican used as proof that the Jews are not the chosen nation, the fact that the Jews will never return to Jerusalem. That's why they're going crazy over the fact that we have Jerusalem. But anyway, such a monumentous event. The Six-Day War, by the way, until close to the end of the Six-Day War, the Israeli government was adamant about not capturing the eastern part of Jerusalem, which contained the Old City. But like it or not, we got Jerusalem. And we came onto the Temple Mount, and the soldiers were celebrating and going crazy. And then Moshe Dayan, the defense minister of Israel, came in a big ceremonious event. He came to Jerusalem, went up to the Temple Mount, to our Har HaBayit, our Temple Mount, and gave it away. You know, Moshe Dayan, he had only one eye. It's a damn shame. But anyway, before the war, you got to remember, Israel's leaders felt they felt the danger, they felt the stress that we might get destroyed, and many of them prayed for a miracle. But when they got the miracle, they didn't turn to God and say, "Oh goodness, thank you God for this miracle. Thank you for bringing us back to Jerusalem." No, they said, "We must have it was our superior army. It was our superior military planning." You know, there's a joke where all the generals who were involved in the Six-Day War, they're sitting around discussing the war and who deserves the credit for it. So David Elazar, he was the commander of the Northern Front. He says, "Of course it was me. It was us. Without the North, Syria would have just come down and overrun it. The entire victory would have just wasted away." And we know how difficult it was to conquer the Golan Heights. Absolutely. Uzi Narkis said, "Yes, okay, the North was a big deal, and without conquering the North, but it wasn't as meaningful as conquering Jerusalem." He was the commander of the Central Command. He says, "I gave the command to go in and take Jerusalem." To which Motagua responded, he says, "Yes, but I was the commander of the brigade that took Jerusalem. And you're right, without Jerusalem, the war is meaningless." And then Moti Hud said, "I'm the commander of the Air Force. Without the Air Force, we would have lost the war. We wiped out the Egyptian Air Force in 6 hours. Other than that, there is no victory." And General Shlomo Goren, who was the chief rabbi of the Israeli army, says, "The Torah tells us, God says, Urdaftem et ovechem v'naflu lifnechem lacherev. You will chase your enemies, and they will fall before you by your sword." This was God. God said so in the Torah. And Moshe Dayan answered, "When did I say that?" Point being, when something good happens, don't get arrogant. Don't say, "Look how wonderful I am." When you're rich, say, "Look how wonderful God is that He made me wealthy." When you recover from an illness, say, "Look what a good immune system I have." You have a good immune system, but thank God for it. God brought us back home. And then He brought us to our capital. And we locked Him out of it. And the Torah tells us, yeah, great, God gives us all of these blessings if we obey Him, but what if we don't? And Parshat Bechukotai gives a whole list of curses that's going to happen if we don't obey Him. God gave us a reward, and in this case, again, He gave us the reward before we earned it. Because the modern state of Israel, during the 19 years that we didn't have the western part of Jerusalem, they fell very, very short of following God's commandments. And yet God brought us back to Jerusalem. And God brought us back to the Temple Mount. And then we spit back in His face. We actually gave it away. We can have Jerusalem, but God can't have His home there. And God promises us, if we don't obey Him, there's going to be many curses. But He will not forsake us. In spite of everything, in spite of all the curses that He promised us, okay? He says, at the end of it all, He says, "I will not forsake you. You will still come back to Israel. Because you're still my chosen nation. Because I love you. Because I promised Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So after everything, after all that happened, we rejected him. He brought us back to Israel. We rejected him again. He brought us to Jerusalem. We rejected him again. And we've had some tough times. But by the looks of it now, our enemies can't stand against us. And what should we do about that? Maybe this time we should get it right. Maybe this time we should turn to God and say, you know what? Yes, we have the faith. We no longer require trust that you're going to give us victory. You're giving us victory. God has given Israel economic prosperity. God has given Israel military victories. God has given Israel political positioning. God has given Israel health. Saved Israel from a disease that's ravaging other societies. And also many of us personally, many people, I should say, who have returned from hospitals, many of us who have recovered from this disease which kills others. How do we respond? We got to turn to God and say, thank you, this is faith. We no longer need to trust that you'll do it, but we have faith that it was you who did it. And the parsha ends with a verse, and this is the last verse in the parsha, and also the last verse in the book of Vayikra, in Leviticus. These are the commandments that Hashem commanded Moshe to give to the nation of Israel, Behar Sinai, on the Temple Mount. Which brings us back to the beginning of this whole discussion. All of it was on the Temple Mount. And why is Hashem reminding us that it was all on the Temple Mount? Like Rashi said, that we need to compare all the other mitzvot to the mitzvah of Shemitah. Just like Shemitah, when you get your reward, you know you already got it. You get the reward before you perform the mitzvah. So there's no question about the reward. It requires faith to know that God gave you that reward, but that reward is coming. It has come. And now you got to perform the commandments. So too, all the other commandments. Even if you don't get the reward in advance, know that the reward that God promised is coming. Just as he set the example in Behar. I'm going to finish with a verse in Tehillim. Tov l'hodot l'Hashem. It is good to give praise to God, u'luzamer l'shimcha alyon, and to give songs and to sing to your exalted name. Okay, King David is praising God. Beautiful. Then he says, lahagid baboker chasdecha, to say in the morning, to speak in the morning of your kindness, ve'emunatcha balelot, and of your faithfulness during the night. What does that mean? In the daytime we talk of God's kindness, and at night we talk about God's faithfulness. What it means is, it's a metaphor. In the daytime, when things are bright, when things are good, thank God for his kindness. Remember that it was him who gave it to you. When things are dark, you should still have faith. And you should still know that God controls everything. God made the darkness, and God will take you out of it. That's my Torah thought. What's yours? Thank you for watching. Shabbat Shalom.